Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful Wednesday. We'll get started in just about a minute. We're just going to give people the opportunity to fill into the room. I hope everyone is doing well. Hello, and welcome to anybody who is just joining us. We'll get started in just about 30 seconds or so. There are people filling into the room.
Yeah, while you're waiting, feel free to say hello. Any greeting that you prefer in the webinar chat, and also do whatever it is that you might need to do so that you could be here and be present, get the most out of today. Like we're super busy, and this may just be one block on your calendar. You're transient going from one meeting to the next, but at the same time, have this be of value to you. And so for those of you who, we do have a recording, we will send it back out. But if you're the type of person who likes to jot down those most important things, those insights, where's your notebook or your notepad or whatever you're using, so that you can just really take value from today.
Hello, hello. Amazing. Hi, Grace from Austin and Regina from DC. Thank you so much for being here. All right, everyone. I want to make sure that we make good on time. And as Brendan mentioned earlier, please feel free to use the chat if you've got any questions or, if something comes up and it feels like a sticking point and you've got a piece of advice or insight that you can share or like an example. I think people really learn from real scenarios. Please feel free to share that in the chat. We'll try our best to get to questions as we see them come in. However, if it feels like maybe it makes more sense to address it later, we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A at the end. So either save it for then or put into the chat and we'll get to it as appropriate. Anyhow, welcome everyone. You are joining a Charter Masterclass powered by our partner LifeLabs Learning. I'm Masela Dukli. I lead workplace strategy here at Charter, and we are thrilled to have you here with us. Our partnership with LifeLabs was born out of a desire to further carry out our mission to help you, owners of the talent agenda, to transform your workplaces to be more fair, more dynamic, and more coherent with where the world is headed. So, of course, that your employees and your company can thrive. This is something that we work toward every day through our rigorous journalism, original research, and live events just like this one. So if you are not quite familiar with Charter, be sure to check us out. We're going to add a link into the chat right now so you can learn a little bit more about our offerings. And I highly, highly encourage you to become a member of Charter Pro. Charter Pro is our exclusive membership for people leaders that helps you stay on the pulse ahead of what's happening in the world of work. You'll have access to, again, original research, reporting, more focused events than maybe what we'll talk about here today. But we cover a range of things, but namely on like 5 major topics. That's AI, innovations on inclusion, leadership, and of course, wellness and well-being in the world of work. And of course, for attending today's webinar, you actually get to take 50% off of an annual membership with the code LLL50. So we'll throw that into the chart as well. And another quick thing I like to add so that just everyone's aware, oftentimes your employer will actually let you get reimbursed, or you might have like a learning development fund or stipend that you use to cover your membership. So I know a lot of people have joined Charter Pro that way, but just something that we like to mention. So before we dive into today's focus, I'm actually just going to take a moment to turn things over to Brendan, and he'll introduce himself and share a bit more about LifeLabs Learning.
Thank you, Masela. And it's
Yeah,
always a pleasure to get to
always a pleasure.
present with you, facilitate with you, collaborate with you. And that's why this partnership is so special to me. So hi, everyone. My name is Brendan, and I'm the facilitation manager here at LifeLabs Learning. And so I oversee our East Coast facilitation team. And I've been with LifeLabs for over 6 years now, and just in terms of leading, facilitating, coaching, developing people all over the world. Now, my background is in organizational psychology, and many of you know what that means, right? You may be having that background yourself, but I care about a lot of things, but particularly how do people thrive in the workplace. And so, two of the biggest challenges that we're always trying to solve, and many of you are, how do you help people perform their best and feel their best at work? And today, and our conversation is still about that. And that is something that Charter is, obviously you heard, is very invested in when it comes to, how to support leaders, HR, and folks in people ops to really stay on top of where can we help drive performance and engagement and motivation in our organization. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about, what that might look like, and also in relationship to AI. And at LifeLabs, our bread and butter is really supporting the skills that matter in the workplace. And that's what we do. We do workshops with leaders, managers, and teams from all over the world. We have worked with over 500,000 learners, and we're still moving in that direction of our mission, to really 1 million skilled people by 2025. But we get to work with such amazing companies. And in addition to training and developing people in our workshops, our skill development sessions, we really are trying to stay at the edge of, okay, what are the challenges that managers and leaders and teams are facing right now? Because we are evolving, things are changing, and how do we support them? What now are the skills that we truly need to double down on? And that is going to, again, be a highlight of today when it comes to supporting talent density, which we will define, and Michelle is going to talk about, and also supporting innovations in AI and uptake in AI, because we need human skills to collaborate with AI as well. So that's what we're excited to get into. So I'll pass it over to Michelle to kind of take you into our agenda for the day.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brendan. So let's dive into today's programming. And as you can see, the title of this session is the Executive Blueprint for Talent Density in 2025. And so I'm glad that you decided to sign up, join us today, but you might be wondering, like, what is talent density? And again, it's one of those things where very literally it makes sense, but if we don't define it, I think it means different things to different people. And so I want to make sure that we are all on the same page and aligned. Talent density refers to the concentration of high-performing, high-capability individuals within an organization or a team. And the idea here is that the more talented people that you have in an organization, the better the overall performance, innovation, agility of the entire group. And I'll say this, especially in today's world, the goal isn't necessarily to increase headcount to make that happen. It's not like let's hire and hire and hire until we have a bunch of high performers. The focus here is on retaining and developing your team to either increase that concentration of high performers or to ultimately have attrition where people who aren't performing where they need to be ultimately end up saying, okay, like this isn't right for me, or the organization, of course, saying, hey, this isn't working out. Again, the focus isn't like, let's, get rid of people, but we want to be thinking about what's going to allow us to scale and make sure that that feels mutually beneficial for the org and, of course, the individual. So beyond the definition, it's important to really kind of get down to like why all of this matters in the first place. And there are several reasons. For starters, like when you have talent density or high talent density, high standards become the norm. And that's the type of thing that we want to make sure is being modeled across the organization consistently. Collaboration improves. So as people trust their teammates' ability, you see them working together more effectively. Performance accelerates because the team is, of course, composed of self-starters, people who are really thoughtful about the work that we're doing. And again, which is the real, a part of the end goal here is that low performers stand out more. So we can either push them to grow, which of course is, one of our top options, or that ends up leading to attrition. It's important that you understand that this also isn't about IQ or skills necessarily. I mean, skills are a part of that, but I mean hard skills. True talent density also includes emotional intelligence, creativity, our problem solving, how we work with other tools. We'll get to AI in just a moment. Our adaptability and resilience, our growth mindset, and then of course the cultural contributions that we make. So Talent density matters now more than ever because our current societal and economical environments demand leaner, faster, more adaptive organizations. And when we think about the pressure that we're feeling on an economic level, companies are either like kind of really staying stagnant or slimming down. That's due to inflation, that's due to market uncertainty, pressure from investors. And what it ultimately kind of boils down to, and we've been seeing this over the last couple of years, is that there are fewer people to deliver on more value. And what we have to understand about today's world with those societal and economic constraints is that we are no longer like looking at headcount as a measure of strength for organizations. We are looking at the impact per employee. And so think about that as the currency of the future when it comes to our workplaces, and understand that that is talent density in action. So ultimately, when you have talent density, you have a competitive edge. Understand that strong cultures retain and attract top talent, and your people are going to build that culture. And high talent employees mean a stronger, culture signal for when you do need to hire. We have 5 generations in the workplace right now. And so again, like how people perceive what your talent looks like, who's doing what work feels very, very important. And then of course, the fact that AI is reshaping our world, but especially reshaping work, the type of work that we will be doing, and of course, the type of work that are going to sort of like fall into our career portfolios. It's no longer just about like titles and ladders, but the fact that people have agility and the ability to kind of move across the organization as needed for specific projects based on, again, what they can do outside of AI and what they can do with AI. So to accomplish talent density, you need to build and sharpen your toolkit. Managers are going to be critical to that mission. And in order to catalyze them, you need to prepare and support them. And Brendan's going to get into what that looks like right now.
Yeah, thank you, Marcella. And I think one of the things that, just in terms of talent density is I am not against like some of the pop culture terminology. Like, remember when we had quiet quitting and it was like disengagement. We've been talking about disengagement for so long, but of course, quiet quitting. And so when it comes to talent density, for me, it's not like I love it because it names what it really puts a popular name to what I think we all have been striving for, which is scaling talent. Like, how do you empower high performing people in the workplace? And when we think about empowering managers, folks, I know that many of you are in management positions like me. And when it comes to talent and performance in the workplace, we've already known for decades and decades that managers make a difference. I think in now, when it comes to how important talent density is, how important it is that we adjust to AI, this is perhaps an inflection point for you and your organization to really raise up the urgency when it comes to skilling managers up in what we're calling at LifeLabs and what we are focusing on at LifeLabs, which are tipping point skills. And now tipping point skills, you think about really what we're saying here is what are the most important skills that are going to help tip this individual, this team, and ultimately this organization into a high performing person, team, or organization. So it's essentially, these are 4 critical skills that we've seen through our research, looking at particular reports such as Gallup's, global state of the workforce report. We have LinkedIn, who's doing their own research on, what are the critical skills that we see, rising in job descriptions. This is through, you kind of sort through all of the chatter around skill development, and a lot of them are going to be on kind of AI related skills, but what we think is going to support that are these ones. And this is what we're going to touch on today. Prioritization skills, right? That comes up as key to not only talent density, but also we'll talk through how that kind of is going to show up even more important when it comes to AI. Collaboration skills, not just collaboration with one another, but collaboration with artificial intelligence. So, in empowering managers to have the skills to take that on, and really knowing where to focus is going to be important. When we think about um, collaboration, there's also just this reality that we've been dealing with, which is remote, hybrid, and distributed teams aren't going anywhere. And looking at Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report, which is just something that I check in with every year, folks, you can look that up and get it for yourself. Managers took the biggest dip of all the groups when it comes to employee engagement. So they're suffering, they're feeling overwhelmed on how to get people engaged, resolve sort of interpersonal challenges, collaboration issues. We have those distributed teams, which are dealing with, you have communication channels and communication logistics that they're feeling stretched by. And so this is going to be so important to empower managers as well as their teams. Feedback, we have a world in which the technological changes that are happening, that was the thing that came up. It's like, okay, now that we're using AI and technology, there's a lot of tasks that we can use technology to support us in. What is important? We have access to all this information. We can use AI quickly to synthesize it. What matters? And to Macella's point that she made, these emotional intelligence skills matter. And I know that emotional intelligence for some of us has become like this little, this sort of maybe overused stereotypical word. But when we think about emotional intelligence, it's what are the skills related to that? And emotional intelligence, a lot of it's around how do I inspire and motivate and influence other people? Feedback is key. And we see it in the research when it comes to teams with talent density. There is a culture of honest, transparent, and continuous feedback. So feedback has always mattered. It's going to matter even more than ever. It is one of those critical emotional intelligence skills that managers definitely need now. And it can be supported through AI. And this last one, when we think about resilience, that our ability to continue to kind of bounce with the turbulence of change, which is a lot of how we define resilience at LifeLabs. It's like our ability to bounce forward and bounce with it. There's a term in aviation that we call like turbulence tolerance, where people who are, pilots and airline crews are trained to be resilient, mentally resilient during turbulence, because they have to be there to think and to act and to kind of and to support the crew and to support the rest of the people on board. So I think managers especially are at this edge where they're feeling the pressures and they are feeling the stress. And if they are not resilient through this, if they're not able to support their teams, to stay mentally healthy and to bounce through the turbulence of now, how can we expect our not just our sort of middle of the road performers, but how do we expect our top performers to keep performing through it? So I think that one especially is probably showing up for you and how to be resilient, and it's definitely going to be showing up for managers. So we're going to touch more on these tipping point skills. These are skills that we train and develop leaders, managers, and teams on at LifeLabs, and we have 1 hour, 90-minute, and 2 hour workshops dedicated to these where we work with folks on it. So we'll speak a little bit more about that and touch upon some of the things that how AI in some ways is going to support you in developing these skills.
Yeah.
So I'll pass it back to Macella.
Thanks so much, Brendan. So look, ultimately then the big question comes down to action. What do you do? And that's something that we want to make very clear here. As you see here on the agenda, the real goal for you as we think about the 4 tipping point skills that Brendan just shared is operationalizing your development. And that means taking those areas, and we're going to go into 3 kind of focus areas, and then we'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into each. So on the next slide here, you want to think about these areas as sort of your focus when it comes to the 4 tipping point skills that you just saw. 1, building and maintaining skills is huge. So I actually have a question in the Q&A coming from Kimberly. Thank you, Kimberly. And Kimberly asked, like, as you improve talent density, how do you keep employees engaged and how you retain them? And especially with this factor in mind, like if they're high performers, they will want more career opportunities. And this is absolutely true. One of the things that we're seeing pretty consistently, and many of you might have seen this as well. So over the past, I'd say roughly 5 years, I mean, this has been happening more than 5 years, this particular survey. I'm going to talk about the Edelman Trust Barometer. And prior to what we'd seen is that, or prior to the last year, 2024, we'd seen that, of course, generally Americans are, relatively skeptical of the media, relatively skeptical of the government, and the one sort of institution that they trusted were their employers. And last year, that changed completely, where sure, we're skeptical of media and politicians, but also really skeptical of our employers. And what that suggests is that like trust is really broken. The employer and employee contract looks a lot different now than it used to. And before, I think we used to see some of the, niceties where it's like, great, I work here, I get paid, maybe you offer me some perks and benefits. And I think if I work hard enough, then I'll just get a promotion. And we all know that I think that's like what's really important there is understanding that it doesn't always, often doesn't work that way, didn't necessarily work that way before. But I think, again, this sort of story of what it means to have a career looks a lot different. And so one of the key things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to helping people feel like, okay, not only can I trust my employer, but on a retention level, that this is a place that's worth me staying. And two, this is a place that like feels worth my energy and time, is making sure that we are building a sense of transparency around what it takes to actually be successful in that organization. More and more, what we're going to see with AI is just people building more of these portfolio careers where it's, again, it's less about titles. And I'm not saying that they're not going to desire pay raises. They're not going to want, for you to say, hey, you bump into this particular thing. But I think the key here is helping people understand how their skills are going to like set them up for success across the organization, not just in one particular thing right now. So we want to be helping people build those things. And when I say build, maybe that's introducing them to new skills. When I say maintain, what are the skills that are actually going to superpower them? And helping them understand what that growth actually looks like within your organization, and also what it doesn't. It's okay to say this doesn't look like this anymore. I think at the core, it's, again, working towards trust, building people up, helping them understand what works, what doesn't work. But again, we'll get to some of that. The second thing here is staying ahead of the curve. And really what that means is keeping your pulse on the change. There is just a lot going on in our world right now. There's a lot of overwhelm. And I think if, the most important thing for your organizations is to really understand that like we don't want to be, caught on our back foot trying to kind of catch up and run into things. So whether that's AI, whether that's how you think about flexible work altogether, or even just things as simple as, great, that employer-employee contract has evolved and has changed. People are not like asking you for pizza parties and like, kombucha on tap. Like that's nice, but it's not the thing that's going to like drive me to like want to be in the office or want to be working on a particular thing. I think the other thing that's important here is like, what are better ways of working? If I'm going to work here, I want to feel like it's something that I can do, something that can be accomplished. And I think people are seeking generally more sense of purpose in their work. So you want to be thinking about like, how do we stay ahead of those desires, thinking about the whole human, not just about perks. These are about the kind of larger picture of an employee's life and the life cycle within your organization. Again, Charter Pro is a really great way to kind of keep up with those things. You get a bi-weekly newsletter. We want to kind of have you dealing with the direct tools on a daily, weekly basis that set you up for success. The third thing here is this idea of filtering and not flooding people with overwhelming information. Again, if you go to LinkedIn, if you just look at your phone, there's just so much excess information. And one of the responsibilities of an organization right now, especially in this particular moment in time, is to be able to say, this is the most important thing. And not just only for organizational priorities, but again, not leaving people up to assumptions. Like typically what will happen is that they'll see that as sort of like an opportunity to think and feel the worst. So when there's an influx of news or something's happening or people concerned about job safety, like you have got to filter the most important news to them. Here's what we're doing. Here's what matters. Here's what we don't know. Here are the scenarios that come with it. But again, this is you thinking about how to operationalize these particular habits. And it really comes down to thinking about trust as a function of how you work with people, treating them as human beings, and making sure that they're really clear about their journey so they can either opt in and again be part of that highly powerful density of talent, or people who say this isn't for me and they decide to leave. Brendan, you can move to the next slide.
Cool. I was answering some really, really good questions in the
Oh,
chat, which I
awesome.
also think we're going to talk about. So
Yeah.
thanks, Marcella. And I think this is where we get into, I think, where some of the questions are coming up. And so in operationalizing that development, Marcella and I are going to touch on each one of those tipping point skills. Again, and our goal is not to flood you, as Marcella just said. It's not, because that's not going to help. So we're really going to look at the 4 tipping point skills, not a flood, just these 4. It doesn't mean that there aren't other skills that are going to be important when it comes to talent density and AI, but these are ones that we think that, we really see coming up over and over again. And we're only gonna, we're gonna talk about some of the ways in which you can use AI to really scale what works in these areas, and to get even more value and support your managers and teams in these areas. But again, we're not going to be able to touch on all of that. So let's get into the first one, and I'll pass it to Marcella to kind of kick us off.
Yeah. So what we're going to dive into is just this idea of thinking about how AI can actually scale some of these 4 focus areas. Brendan and I will kind of go back and forth, but I want you to kind of see these again, as Brendan mentioned, as like they're tipping points, but they're like superpowers. And so not only is this, of course, going to help your organization, but this is the type of thing that, like, one, keeps people feeling satisfied. Oftentimes when we see people sort of struggling in an organization, it is the result of a lot of dysfunction, not being clear on like why we're doing something, feeling like it's difficult to work with people, not understanding if they're successful or not. And then, of course, just feeling like there's a ton of whiplash, especially when the world outside of them feels particularly chaotic. So this is going to be like a really grounding force. And then we'll actually give you very specific examples about how you might use AI to kind of superpower this. My one suggestion and encouragement is that, like, this is not a you alone thing. So hopefully in your organizations, you have a little bit of support, whether that is like your own sort of HR people team or otherwise. And if it's not, and it's maybe somebody on a different team, that's wonderful too. But these things come to life when we work together as a team. And so again, when we think about sharing the skills, sharing that talent density, understanding what high performance actually looks like, it should be something that there's alignment on, because when everybody agrees upon it and everybody understands this is what it takes to be successful here, everybody can contribute well. So Brendan will get us started on prioritization, and then we will dive into the rest.
Yeah. Now, prioritization, it's one of the core skills that we've continued to see when it comes to great managers and high performing people. So folks who are high performing, where there is talent density, we have people who can prioritize well. Now, in this age of AI, how does prioritization going to matter even more? And you could see here, right? When we think about prioritizing, how might we, and a lot of folks are already doing this, I know some of you are, how can we utilize and collaborate with artificial intelligence to identify very quickly where is there room for efficiency, where might we reduce waste and clutter within our work, and what are those tasks that are ripe for automation and AI integration. And so it's going to be kind of a meta masterclass, because you're going to have, the idea here is to utilize managers and utilize AI to actually find out where can we continue to collaborate with AI and use it. Now, some of the things that automatically come to mind, I know some of you may have already done this. I've been doing this with my team. We talk about time audits as critical ways of sort of gaining awareness into where is our time going. And a time audit, folks hear the word audit and they immediately think of like we've done something wrong, or we're trying to avoid penalties, or the IRS is coming after me. Time audits are time tested, and we look at patterns within our work. So we look at all the time we've spent doing what we're doing. There are apps that do this really well. I know that there are AI integrated applications that do this well. Just utilizing your calendar. So we have AI that can easily sort of identify like what are the things that you're working on, how long are you working on them for, and what are those things in which AI might make a difference in reducing the amount of time that you spend on them. Right. So simply utilizing AI for a time audit. Where is our time going? What are the biggest trends? What are the biggest time sucks on our team, and where might we optimize those? Also, something as simple as what are the most important things? Something that we talk about when it comes to prioritization is managers supporting their teams and supporting those high performers in focusing on the most important work. Now, just something as simple as utilizing AI to extract from meeting notes, from one-on-ones, what are the things that we should focus on based on your evaluation? What are tasks that we should take immediate action on? What are our action items? A simple way of just finally really quickly getting down to what are those most important things so we can prioritize them. We also think that, and I think people are already doing this, where we can see very quickly, where are there opportunities to kind of focus our attention. And that might be on like, who are the people that may need support right away, or who are our biggest contributors to this particular project. And so that's just like another way that we see AI making a difference. I also think that, when we think about AI, something that we talk very deeply about is deceptive work. And in a world in which there's even more importance put on those highly urgent, important tasks, where it's really going to define the performance of your organization, how can we help people focus on the most important high impact work, the stuff that really helps contribute to our goals? How do we do that? And that's, again, where we're seeing AI going to come into play, where it's what are the tasks that don't contribute to that? How do we get those people to contribute to the most important work? So those are just a couple of tips and ways that we see AI scaling prioritization. And I'm going to pass it to Marcella to get onto collaboration.
Yeah. So when it comes to collaboration, ultimately the goal here is to find ways to just make working with each other more effective, more seamless. It's important to just understand that like all of this matters, because collaboration debt is going to slow your team down. It's going to make it so that you don't actually spend time focus on the thing that you need to focus on, whatever it is that you've already prioritized and deemed as like the most important thing, or the thing that's going to drive the most impact. And so when you think about high talent density organizations, they are really focused on removing the friction between people and functions. And so when it comes to collaboration, your focus should be two things. One, flagging your knowledge silos, like understanding where like you've got information trapped in people or in particular functions of your organization, and then also understanding what it means to be high performing in general. So somebody had asked earlier in the Q&A box about like, should we be doing essentially an audit around like what does our talent actually look like to start with before we start thinking about building or trying to transform into a high talent density organization. And so, yes, that's true. You want to understand, of course, where you're starting so you can track your progress. And I think kind of along the way, one of the things that we want to do so that we don't spend so much time deliberating and literally you can start this right away is understanding what's working. Like when you see teams, when you see individuals working very well, yes, people are individualized, but there's something that we can learn from all of that. And so when we think about using AI to kind of really surface those ideas, there are a bunch of different ways, but these are three that I think are really helpful. The first thing is really thinking about mapping who's collaborating and also who's not. So you can use AI to analyze your meeting invites, your Slack channels, project docs, to really sort of visualize teams or individuals, understand like who, like what's represented in certain clusters, maybe who or what is isolated, and then also over connection, which is a really big part of that. I think I can say this in my work at Charter and previously. Brendan and I used to actually work at LifeLabs Learning. One thing that I saw quite often in working with leaders was over connection, over collaboration was one of the biggest hindrances, especially in cultures where people feel like we should talk about everything, we should do everything, and not understand how difficult it actually is to scale that sort of behavior, how limiting it is, how exhausting it is. And then ultimately people are like, ugh, this is the worst. It's literally a seed for people to feel as though the work that they're doing isn't working. So I'm going to actually throw into the chat right now a prompt that you can use if you want to explore some of this. And there are tons of, more dynamic prompts that you might be able to sort of get into. I encourage you to have conversations with ChatGPT, or if you've got something that's internal to you that you're utilizing, that's awesome. But you are taking information, even again, built into a lot of the tools that we'll be using going forward, whether it's Slack or even Microsoft Teams probably has something that they're adding there. But the idea is to kind of really get clear on, again, like, help me understand where there are holes and where there's just like a lot of connection that maybe isn't particularly useful. The next area that you want to look at, again, is that over collaboration risk. So AI can be good at detecting when teams are actually like in too many meetings, maybe when people are CC'd on too many threads. So you can use Google to do this. And also just like when people are unclear on their roles, this feels like a really big thing. You might use whatever messaging system you use, whether that's Slack, Teams, whatever. But this can cause collaboration drag, where everything, again, either takes too long or there are too many people involved. You all understand, you get it. You've probably been there before. But the idea here is to kind of like really narrow in. Like, data is particularly helpful in making change happen and wanting people to kind of be honest about it. I think sometimes we can get very addicted, for lack of a better word, to how we work because it creates a sense of busyness and purpose, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily satisfying. So the thing that you do over and over again, this is what I have to do, but it doesn't mean that it necessarily makes you feel good or sets you or the team up for success. So another prompt that you might consider for something like this, when using whatever AI model that of your choosing, might be something like, hey, like, where are we seeing duplicative efforts? Where are we seeing people ask the same question over and over again? Where are we seeing those types of things, or what you want to be utilizing? I'll also say, of course, when it comes to AI and just our own safety and feeling like we're not just exposing ourselves. For example, if you are using AI with Slack or using any sort of internal AI tools with Slack, these are for public channels. These are not for private, DMs or anything like that. The last thing that I mentioned, the last thing I mentioned at the top, and we'll mention last right now, is spotting patterns for high-performing teams. So look, this is all about understanding what's working. We're already doing it. Let's double down. It is much more impactful to say, great, let's look at the behavior that we do want and create more of it, rather than saying, don't do that. That's not working. It's not helpful. It's not helpful with anybody, especially not when we're working with adults. And so here, what you can do is ask AI to analyze maybe like your retro notes, team surveys, performance outcomes, to kind of identify like what collaboration behaviors are specifically driving success. And we see this a lot. So in January, we at Charter held our first AI summit called Leading with AI. And we had some really thoughtful practitioners, either people who were sort of like leading the charge when it came to AI or building AI products, or creating like learning and development AI focused work within their organizations. And one of the conversations that we had, or at the very beginning, a conversation that I moderated, was between Dan Shipper, or with Dan Shipper. And he spoke so clearly about like how he's using AI to kind of really like synthesize this information for his team at Every. So he's the CEO and co-founder of Every. They write a column and also do some like really thoughtful work on AI and some additional consulting. But not only his like personal work, like, hey, what behavior did I do that actually like worked really well in that conversation? Or hey, what's the thing that I need? Like, we need to be accessing our information really quickly. Again, on a team level, thinking about the blueprint, we want to be able to make sure that that information gets to everybody. It shouldn't get stuck and live with just one person, one team. We need to make sure, great, something happened on the sales team that worked really, really well. How might that be applicable to, our customer ops team? How might that be applicable to our engineering team? The idea is to take the insights, disperse them, make sure it's shared knowledge rather than just stuck with one person or one particular group. So a prompt there that could be particularly useful for you, I'll throw it into the chat again. What collaboration norms, rituals are mentioned in feedback from high-performing teams? So we're comparing what they're saying, of course, on a very subjective level, but then understanding how that actually compares with how effective a team is. I'll pass it back to Brendan.
Thank you. All right. So we got the tips on collaboration. I love the prompts that you're sharing in chat. Definitely taking those. So let's get on to feedback. It is our most popular, most taught workshop at LifeLabs Learning and has been for years. Why? We all know that feedback is critical. We hear it all the time. So feedback, and is particularly building feedback cultures, has been so critical to performance and engagement in the workplace. And perhaps even more than ever now. So when we think about companies that are continuing to prioritize building their feedback skills, building their feedback cultures, you're just more likely to have talent density within your organization. Now, some of you, I think, are interested in this specifically. Kind of harkening back to some of the questions that were asked, right? When people are talking about when we think about evaluating talent density, do we need to define high performance? Yes, right. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And also, Maureen, you had asked this question around, when we think about talent density and performance evaluations, right? Don't we need to think about kind of there's going to be an expected distribution of talent. So, I think that there's this question of like, how do we actually know that we're truly focusing on talent density, right? Because we're going to have, variation. So let's talk about a few things that I think are going to matter here. One, when we think about feedback conversations, this is something that we train and develop managers to be able to do, is how to give quality feedback. But even myself, who has been giving feedback for a long time now to individuals who I coach, as well as my direct reports who I coach, mentor, and support in terms of their performance, feedback has been a skill that I've had to develop. But now more than ever, we have tools, specifically AI, that can help us to refine and practice. And, I bet if we even kind of open up chat, you could probably see, like, we have a bunch of folks here. If you've ever used AI to craft feedback or prepare for a feedback conversation, just put me in chat. If you've ever utilized AI to practice a feedback, how to give feedback or prepare for a feedback conversation, give me like a little emoji, me. It really is, like, when we think about just one simple way of getting better at giving feedback, there it is. Now, does that mean you can just have AI supplement your feedback? No, because when it comes to using AI, you still had to give AI some specific data and behaviors, and most likely you gave some specific impact. You put it in there, right? The behaviors, the impacts, what happened, and then why it was important. And then AI in some ways gave you a sense of, okay, here's how you might word this. And that empowers you to then go ahead and maybe have that conversation send that message that maybe you would have been holding back. And so, just in general, there's that utilizing AI to make sure that you're giving really specific, actionable feedback to people. And and that alone right there has the opportunity to turn, a performer who's right at that edge of perhaps high performing and kind of tip them over into that high performing state. Now, also the second point that I think is really important, and my direct reports are already doing this, is utilizing AI to synthesize feedback. Now, there's a few ways that I think that this can happen. And you can use this at both individual levels, team levels, and organizational levels. So I'll go through, I think, some examples of each. Um, I think one of the things that, at least as a manager, and many of you care about, are performance and engagement. Now, we use, for instance, like we partner with Culture Amp. We utilize them for employee engagement. And right there, like I've had opportunities, and we've had opportunities as an organization to utilize AI to help us in some ways, and help us to define, like, where are we having the biggest opportunity areas. Where are we sort of right for kind of intervention where we can create some goals and actually maybe build some skills where we tip it to high performance. Now, also, one of the things that my direct reports are using AI is for individual performance. So we get hundreds and thousands of data points from our learners. And one of the things that I already have my direct reports doing, and right now we do monthly metrics, right? We look at our performance over the month and look for what are our strengths and what are opportunity areas. And we've already developed as a team a list of prompts in which we're taking our feedback, filtering it into AI, and pulling out, like, what are the things that I did really well based on the feedback, and what are some possible opportunity areas. And what that allows me as a manager to do is to coach and give feedback, to focus, right? If I'm going to go observe their performance at any point in time, I get to actually look for those specific things, reinforce those skills that are really working. And also, just at this team level, one of the things it's allowing us to do is see what are top performing facilitators doing. And so in the same way, I think that we've always been trying to, as organizations, define what does high performance look like. We now have AI to help us do what our brains sometimes just have trouble doing, which is synthesizing a lot of feedback and looking for those opportunity areas. And so that's something else that we're going to see come up, and it's already coming up when it comes to talent density. Is there's the companies that make a really clear connection between individual contributions and the team performance or organizational performance. They're the ones that really have strong talent density, because they're really recognizing those contributions, and therefore they get to reward those contributions. And one of the things that, at least the companies that I've worked with and managers that I've worked with, is there's not a great connection between the individual and team. Yeah, we set team goals. Sometimes individuals have goals, but there's not a strong way of measuring how well those contributions impact. And so, yeah, you celebrate those team wins, but what you're left with, and this is where we see, can cause demotivation, is that those top performers, they sort of get lost in the mix. They get lost in terms of their individual contributions were not truly rewarded. And Josh Bershin actually just talked about this. Some of you are familiar with Josh Bershin. He partners with Deloitte. He wrote an article in 2025, How to Create Talent Density, and really specifically delving into some of this research on organizations who are really good at measuring individual contribution so that they can reward that, are more likely to promote that talent density. And I think AI is really there to support that. So for some of you who are wondering, like, hey, before we focus on talent density, do we have to define high performance? Yeah, you're going to have to really define, like, what do those top contributors do, operationalize what those things are, and then really clearly start to measure who is doing this. And I think that could be a little uncomfortable at times, but at this, I think in this way, I think what is more uncomfortable to me are top performing people making, that 80-20 rule I talked about, those 20% of those people on their team who are leading to 80% of the performance of the team, just feeling overworked and overburdened. We call it punishing high performance. And I've seen it happen. I see it happening currently. And I think that that's going to be key to promoting talent density is rewarding that top performance, not really punishing it, right? So utilizing AI to practice giving feedback and sharing those feedback, extracting trends, extracting what top performing people are doing, and then utilizing that to really connect those top performing behaviors to high performance. Right, those are just a few ways that I think AI is going to be really helpful here. And I'll pass that to Marcella to kind of bring us home on that last tipping point skill.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brendan. I'm with you. I think it's going to be imperative for us to be just, again, really grounded in how to operationalize all of what we're talking about today. And this particular skill of resilience is one of those ones that I think is a little bit maybe not as intuitive, right? So when you talk about something like feedback, people are like, okay, still it's hard, but they're thinking like, I know a literal thing I need to do. I think for a very long time, we have, I mean, maybe for all of time, we've looked at something like resilience and assumed that some people have it and some people don't. Some organizations have it and some people don't. And then, of course, in the world that we live in, you see so much happening. And of course, there's like that, like, chaos on a societal level. But then there's like the chaos that people are experiencing in their own personal lives that can feel really, really jarring. And so I think when we look at our employees, it's interesting. Earlier in my career, like a question that we would always ask leaders when kind of like preparing for these like facilitation and consultation engagements is like, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be like the skill that you would want your team to have? And the most common answer was that I would want my team to be more strategic. And that's still a thing. People still want their teams to be strategic. But one thing that we're hearing pretty commonly when it comes to leaders is just like more resilient. There's just so much happening right now. And I just really wish that people would be able to bounce back. And it's not an unreasonable ask, but just like strategy, I think people assume that it's so simple and everybody just gets it. And in high performing, high talent density environments, resilience isn't like something that's just built through grit. It is modeled by leaders. It is embedded into routines. It's reinforced through the culture. And so your three focus areas when it comes to resilience, role modeling, like senior on down, like this needs to be a skill that people practice and they know specifically what they need to practice. What does resilience look like on your or at your organization within your team for a specific role? You want to be able to really speak to that. Ritualized, meaning that it's coming up again and again. It can't be that, oh, we did a layoff last year and we don't know like why you're still upset about it. It doesn't work that way. There's been a lot that's happened, and if again, trust is really broken right now. And so if it's not something that's addressed with people, if they're not clear on where you stand, there's a lot of opportunity for people to be demotivated, for people to feel burnt out, for people to feel like, oh, why am I doing this in the first place? And so us constantly bringing it up, probably to the point where it feels like, gosh, do I really have to say this again, is probably your best option. Ritualize habits that actually support resilience. And then, of course, make sure that you continue to reinforce it again and again and again. So without this, talent density can really lean into burnout. When there's a high expectation for how people work, high expectation for performance, of course, it's likely that people go into burnout zone, which is why it needs to be paired with our expectation that we are building high talent density organizations. So the benefits are with resilient teams, people bounce back faster, they sustain energy a lot longer, they perform better under pressure. And I think here's the thing that's really big about it is that they understand what it looks like to create space for recovery. Like they can do that not only for the team, but for themselves. They understand how to celebrate progress, not only, because we didn't we totally reach the finish line or we didn't. Like this is progress over perfection. And again, they are seeing this sort of vulnerability modeled again and again. So the three ways that I think that you can really sort of anchor the three focus areas of resilience is one, share how you and or how you're actually adapting with your team. Like And when I say resilience, here's what I'll say. It's not just all emotional. It's not all about when bad things happen. This can be simply like, hey, we're thinking about kind of flipping the script a little bit, and we're really trying to lean into being more of a skills-based organization. So rather than it being very specific, everybody's got a title, we want to think about skills taxonomy. And I know that's really overwhelming, and I'm kind of feeling bogged down by it, but these are the things that we're doing. This is the direction that we're going in. Helping people sort of see clearly, like the type of certainty that comes from feeling like we know what might be happening, and also even explaining when you don't have any news, hey, I don't know like where that's going right now, but I'll promise you, I'll update you when I do know. Or here, I'm ritualizing a regular time to tell you if there's an update or if there's not an update is so, so important in all of this. But again, creates a habit. I will be okay. I will get the information that I need, and I don't have to beg for it. I don't have to make assumptions. I can just focus on the thing that is most important for me right now. One way to be thinking about it. Again, I wanted to share just like ways for you to think about this too. One thing that can be helpful, for example, with like sharing it, not everybody is like super comfortable in the sense of like sharing their whole, life story, whatever. You can use AI to prompt yourself of like, hey, we're dealing with this particular thing. Obviously, again, if you're not comfortable, you don't have to put in any sort of details that would be revealing of your organization or a specific person or scenario, but help me break down 3 scenarios of like, ideal, good, and like best or worst case scenario. The idea here is just to simplify it, make it super easy for people, and share how you're feeling about it as well. If you're feeling pessimistic, you don't have to be like, gosh, it's all going to blow up, but you can say, hey, like, I'm not really certain right now. My impetus is to feel like maybe it won't work. And if it doesn't work, here's what we'll do next. Just creating a sense of certainty around there. The other thing is spotting some early warning signs. And I think that this is really, really powerful just because burnout is, it's funny, when people are burnt out, suddenly they're like, I'm burnt out. Oh my gosh, like, look, it's happening. And you have teams and leaders and organizations responding in this way as if like it just happened yesterday. Burnout's like very perpetual. It's sort of like the last stage of it. It's sort of the equivalent of like when you see somebody kind of, lose it for what it's worth, or for lack of a better word. And we're like, oh my gosh, you're so angry. There's a feeling underneath that. That is just a consequence of what has already been happening. So you want to be thinking about how you might actually use, the information that you already have available to you to kind of see when the tides are changing or see when you're seeing some sort of a shift. You can use AI again, whether that is an internal tool that you have or you're using something like ChatGPT to analyze pulse surveys, engagement check-ins. Sometimes people use things like 15.5 for like regular one-on-ones, whatever it might be. But maybe what you're saying is, a prompt might be something like summarize, recent team survey responses. Where are there signs of fatigue or disengagement? Like, are we noticing that people are saying something that they were saying 2 quarters ago when we knew that we had an issue versus right now? And then the last thing here is reinforcing resilience themes for your managers. Managers have been burnt out and exhausted for so long. We keep adding things to their to-do list. We're saying, great, be everybody's therapist. Great, make sure you're also a high performer. Great, manage these people. It is a lot of work, and they're often not getting the support or care that they need. We've got to be very explicit about, like, again, what it means to be a successful manager or leader in your organization, helping them feel rewarded for when they're doing amazing work, giving them the feedback that they need to feel like, okay, if that's not working, here's the direction I can go in. But beyond that, we also want to make sure that we're equipping them with the right tools and resources. And you can use AI to help them come up, and they can too. We want to kind of create a culture of like people being able to experiment and self-serve in your workplace. But the idea is to maybe a prompt could be something like create 5 check-in questions managers can ask to gauge energy and resilience during one-on-ones that aren't just like, so are you feeling burnt out? If that's the question they're asking, it's probably a little too late. So we want to be feeling for these things along the way. When we see something that stands out, we can do something about it much more effectively. And again, this can be streamlined. I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel. I'm saying sit for a second, think about the things that you do really well. Think about the things that maybe AI can help you with. And when I say, you are allowing AI to like join you in that, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden it's like AI doesn't, you don't check in. No, you, the human, must be in the loop, but you'd be surprised at how much faster you can go, and you want to bring in your team to help you actually make that work. So that brings us to a close, and we are like just hitting time.
I know I'm answering some questions in chat because it was so good
Yeah,
too, where someone was talking about, resilience and like, are we normalizing in some ways that, there's negative events that are happening, and is it more grit than resilience? But yeah, I think resilience in this way, and I know we have to end. I think we're all going to be dealing with what are going to be just commonplace change.
yeah,
Meaning it doesn't, like, if we think about change as maybe it does feel negative, right? Because we have to do this differently, or we have new priorities, or we have to deal with new sanctions, new economic
yeah,
uncertainty. Yeah, it's not. Life is really seemingly not easy, and some of it does seem negative, but I also think that it's just norm and normal. And so I do think that all of us are like just being here today and just look like, how might I pause, focus on some of the most important work, like prioritizing my focus is an act of resilience, folks. And it's not like anything really negative is happening, but it's that you're just acting in a way that's going to allow you to perform well, to navigate change and uncertainty that is going to just be a norm in some ways for us.
yeah.
So, and I hope that helps in terms of saying resilience is really about all, like, dealing with all the change, the challenge, the uncertainty that life brings us.
Yeah. And I'll say this, Brendan knows, maybe some of you have known if we're connected on LinkedIn or we've, worked together in the past, but I had twins. They'll be 14 months this month. And I've been, just in my motherhood journey, I've been thinking a lot about like, what's the thing that I like really want to teach my kids? What's the thing I really want to teach my kids? And to be honest, what I've sort of landed on is resilience. There's this idea in my mind, not to make it doom and gloom, but I keep saying, and I said this to Brendan the other day, I'm like, you gotta have these moments where you're like, sure, for as long as I'm alive, I'm gonna like want to do the best that I can for my kids. I want to make sure, and kids are not employees, but I'm just giving you an example. I want to I'll be able to provide for them, or hopefully make their lives a little bit easier if it gets hard, or hopefully be there. But like, none of those things are actually promised to us, just like how there's so much uncertainty in the world at large. Like, I can't promise any employee or even myself anything. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'd like to believe, okay, I think I have ideas, but we all know that can change so quickly. And so when I think about what is the most important thing they can have, I'm like, I don't know, like, how much time we actually have. I want to make sure they have the capacity to know that, like, when they meet a problem, they have the ability to navigate it. They have the skills, they have the resources, they have the tools. And if not those things at all, they have the mindset to say, like, I can get through this. And so I think it's the same thing for our teams, really thinking about like, hey, we can't control everything. There are some things we can control internally, but beyond that, what mindsets are we going to leave with our employees so that they meet a problem and they say, okay, there's something I can do about it. Or at the very least, I feel motivated enough to consider doing something about it. And that is how I would like to think about resilience and all of what we are dealing with today. But thank you all so much for
Yes.
joining us. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you for staying a little bit later. Yes, we'll be sharing slides and key takeaways. We appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with either Brendan and I. You can find us on LinkedIn via our names or the links
Oh,
that we shared here. And again, you can get 50% off a charter membership, which is like our biggest offering of the year, with the code LLL50.
yeah. Thank you, folks. I know some of you are still with us. Thanks for staying afterwards. And we I guess so we could hang out for a little bit. If you do have
Yeah.
questions, plop them in.
Yeah, if anyone has any
Otherwise,
questions, feel free to drop them in. We can stay on for a couple more minutes.
yeah. But yeah, just really thanking you all for pausing with us and for being, just here committed to your development, to thriving, to supporting your organizations. It's really what we are here for, and it's, a big sense of meaning and purpose for us. So thank you. Can you talk more about high performance and how that's related to talent density? Yeah, so Paige, talent density really is just about the concentration of high performance. That's it. And I think it's something that we've all cared about, meaning it's not like organizations have not cared about how how do we achieve high performance from as many people as possible. It is just really this the term talent density was popularized by Netflix. Uh, because that was specifically that was their focus is individual performance. How do we promote the highest concentration of that individual performance? And so this is what when we think about high performance, it's one, defining it, really clearly defining it. We didn't talk about this today, but then it would be hiring for it, which is a whole nother ballgame. But then it's once you, whatever, within the people in your organization, and once you have the people in your organization, if we've defined it really well and clearly, then we can promote and reward and continue to, in some ways, continue to kind of keep that talent and make it more dense. So that's really what that's about. I hope that answered that question for you. And Marcella, feel free to add in anything I missed.
Yeah. So Paige, I'll add too. I think when you think about talent density in comparison or in relation to high performance, so again, I think this has always been the goal, but historically, from an economic perspective, many organizations had a little bit more opportunity to keep somebody who's sort of like good. Like Netflix's perspective, like Brendan mentioned, was more like, we don't want good, we want great. We want to, because the way that they're looking at it and the way, or at least that's where the origin was in their culture philosophy and the way organizations can be thinking about it today, is like the concept of like generosity begets generosity. If I have some good or more good and then great, then I have mostly good and then speckles of great. And so the hope was that when we're really clear about what it means to be great, so there's organizational behaviors, again, that might be something related to how we give feedback to one another, how we contribute to culture, how we collaborate, engage, et cetera, not necessarily related necessarily to our job. And then, of course, job high performance, which might be related to performance reviews. But I think, yes, you consider performance reviews. And yes, you're also looking at the types of habits that you're seeing that people practice on a regular basis. But again, in order to fully evaluate that, you want to kind of understand what it means to be successful. There needs to be alignment about that. And beyond alignment, I think there also needs to be, as Brendan mentioned in the beginning, real sort of operationalized behaviors that people can turn to. It's not enough to say like a high performing person at X company is strategic. Well, what does it mean to be strategic here? Does it mean that this person's asking particular questions? Does it mean that this person is able to provide a particular context? That like you want to be super clear on what it means to be high performing. You want to also not just consider the person's role, but how they function within the organization. And then from there, again, in today's world, we're not focused on like, okay, like some people don't do that, so we'll just hope we can hire more people that can. The goal here is let's try and take the people that aren't performing where they need to be, get them up to pace, and then really sort of lift up everyone, because it needs to be an environment that is really sort of circular and feeds each other.
Plus one to that. Yeah, Jamie, thanks for adding that into chat as well. Thank you, Paige, for the question.
Thank you. Any others? Anything coming up for anyone, or like specific examples that maybe you're dealing with or curious about that we can address for you?
Don't see any open questions.
All right.
Well, we're 10 minutes in.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are 10 minutes in. Looks like we've got no questions. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, any questions, any thing that we can support you with, either Charter or LifeLabs, just reach out and let us know, and we will see you next quarter.
Thanks, Marcella, and thank
Thanks,
you all.
Brendan. Thanks,
Such
all.
a pleasure.